In this presentation, you will learn various strategies public relations professionals utilize in order to ensure the success of their communication. We are going to start with an introduction of the goals of communication. Then we will look at various strategies used by public relations professionals to ensure the audience receives the message, pays attention to it, and understands it. With that, we will discuss relevant definitions, models, and theoretical approaches. Next, we will look at what makes a message credible and memorable. Finally, we will discuss how public relations practitioners ensure the audience acts on the message and review the adoption process. As you should know by now, communication is the third step in the 4 essential steps of effective public relations. Communication is often referred to as execution because in this step, strategies and tactics are actually implemented as opposed to the planning and research phases. These strategies and tactics may include social media profiles, blogs, news releases, and special events, among others. Effective PR practitioners use a variety of these tactics in combination in order to reach the objectives of the organization. The traditional means of achieving publicity and communicating with the public is limited, but technology has enhanced the ability of PR professionals to communicate with their target audience. As I talk about communication in this presentation, I will reference this campaign for meningitis prevention called Voices of Meningitis. Let's take a look at a public service announcement from the campaign.
So grown up, so ready to take on the world. I thought I was finished raising my baby. Turns out, I'm starting all over.
Though rare, meningococcal meningitis can destroy lives. In less than 24 hours, it can cause brain damage, lost limbs, even death. Even if your child already got a meningitis shot, teens need a second vaccination as early as age 16. They're still your babies. Give them a second shot to help keep them protected.
Before tactics are developed, PR professionals decide which objective needs to be met. PR practitioners often focus on the first 2 goals listed here because they have the most control in achieving these. Message exposure is a good starting point because without exposing the target audience to the message, the organization's objectives can't be achieved. Message exposure is attained through providing media outlets with materials and distributing the message in various forms. After a PR professional gives materials to a media outlet, the gatekeepers filter the information and disseminate it to the public. A goal of communication is to ensure that the message remains intact even when it is transmitted through various media forms. Another goal is to get the target audience to accept the message as valid. This is essential in order to achieve attitude and behavior change. Attitude change is an audience's mental or verbal commitment to change their behavior, and behavior change is the actual change of current practices or the purchase of the product. We are going to review 2 models that explain how a message moves from the producer of the message to its receiver. The first model, Schramm's model, follows a linear fashion when looking at the relationship between source, encoder, signal, decoder, and destination. We will review this model in greater detail on the next slide. Grunig's 2-way symmetrical communication model suggests that the ideal public relations practice allows the public to be equal to the organization in terms of communication. While this balance can be seen as ideal, research shows that typically organizations do not achieve 2-way symmetrical communication because the organization has mixed motives. That is, the organization may do something that benefits the public, but only if it is benefiting itself as well. The best way to make sure the audience receives the message is to speak to them personally in a one-on-one setting. Think about times you have had to persuade someone to do something. Is your message better conveyed through sending them a text or speaking to them personally? Barriers to communication include large groups or meetings and, unfortunately, the mass media. Receiving the message in the Voices of Meningitis campaign was successfully accomplished by taking it directly to teens and their parents through the campaign spokesperson, former Olympic swimmer and medalist Sarah Torres, who traveled around the country to swim with swim teams and have them take letters to parents about meningitis. In the attractive folder you see here, with the photo included, the parent would be more likely to read the message than if it had just been a letter. Torres also made media appearances with a meningitis survivor or a parent who had lost a child to meningitis in those cities. The campaign also organized a speaker tour that included parents who had lost children to meningitis to speak to civic groups around the country. Now we're going to look at Ch7Com's model in greater detail. Ch7Com's original model, seen at the very top of the slide, moves in a linear fashion from source to destination. The idea is that a source creates a message, encodes it by putting it in a tangible format, sends it through a channel, and the receiver decodes the message. Ch7Com later added to this model and included the concept of field of experience. The idea is that there must be a sphere of shared experience in order to communicate properly. For example, if a message is highly technical or specialized, the receiver needs to have an understanding of the subject similar to the sources. These two models only explain one-way communication and do not account for feedback given by the receiver to the sender. Ch7Com's expanded model, seen at the bottom of the slide, expands the original idea and includes feedback. This model explains the exchange of information in two-way communication. Although these models seem quite obvious today, presenting them in this way helped people understand how messages were sent and received and what barriers might prevent the message from either getting to the receiver or make the receiver unable to decode the message as it was intended. The models we just reviewed sought to explain the information exchange process in communication. Harold Laswell defined communication as who says what in which channel to whom with what effect. We will now look more closely at the audience. Although a message is disseminated to the public may not pay attention, and those who do may not understand or act on the message. Media uses and gratifications theory suggests that the audience makes intelligent and conscious choices about which media will fulfill their needs. If you want to be entertained, perhaps you will choose television. If you want to figure out what's going on in town, perhaps you will choose a newspaper or news website. So it is important to understand the audience because tailoring a message to a specific set of people can increase the likelihood of attitude and behavior change. Audiences either actively seek out information or passively process information. Passive audiences are attracted to messages that are entertaining, catchy, and creative. Celebrity endorsements and dramatic images are just two ways to catch the attention of these audiences. Since active audiences are already seeking out information, they are likely to have some previous knowledge on the subject. Additional information, articles, and supplemental resources work well when targeting active audiences. For the Voices of Meningitis campaign, having a celebrity athlete spokesperson and including parents and their personal stories will make the audience pay more attention to the message than if it was delivered solely by a health professional. Now that we have reviewed how to get the audience's attention, we're going to go over how to make sure the message is understood. Language is the most important aspect of making sure a message is communicated. Literacy levels, education, and culture all impact the way an audience perceives a message. For example, many Asian countries have collective cultures, meaning individuals focus on loyalty to their family, community, and country. On the other hand, American culture is individualistic. Understanding cultural differences helps PR professionals develop a more personalized message for the target audience. It is also important to review your messages and check for simplicity and clarity, which can both increase the message's understandability. Finally, using acronyms and slogans help the audience remember the message. Avoid jargon, cliché, and euphemisms because the more complex the message, the harder it is to understand and remember. The Voices of Meningitis campaign emphasized key messages such as how contracting the disease can change your life in less than 24 hours. To help teens remember this point, when Dara Torres visited swim teams, she swam 24 laps with them. A second key message that you saw in the public service announcement says that teens may need a second vaccination to avoid contracting meningitis. We've now gone through the process of getting the audience's attention and making the message understandable. The next step is to make the message credible. Without message credibility, the receiver of the message may discontinue the message or even take an opposing viewpoint. Source credibility is a key variable in message credibility. In order for a source to be credible, the audience must perceive the individual as honest, knowledgeable, and objective. For example, when asked about customer experience, a Walmart spokesperson's honesty and objectivity might be questioned because of their inherent bias and relationship with the organization. The context of the message refers to the message aligning with the actions of the organization. When the U.S. Chamber of Commerce passed out coffee mugs marked Made in China at a briefing on the importance of buying American, the message lost credibility within this context. Involvement can be described in terms of association with an issue or product. Individuals with higher levels of interest or concern process information with attention to detail. On the other hand, those with low levels of involvement can be compared to the passive audience we discussed earlier. In the Voices of Meningitis campaign, the credibility of the message was conveyed by involving people who had first-hand experience with the illness. PR professionals can make an audience remember the message by utilizing repetition and delivering information in a variety of ways via multiple communication channels. A good example of this is studying. When you review the information multiple times and in different ways, you are more likely to retain the information. The Voices of Meningitis message was conveyed in multiple ways, including the already mentioned swim events with Dara Torres, the letters to parents, and the speaker tour. They also used public service announcements, a website with materials such as brochures that could be ordered, and social media. The teens who attended the swim events were encouraged to use the hashtags DaraSwims and meningitis when sharing photos with Dara Torres. Making sure the audience acts on the message has to do with reaching the right audience at the right time. For example, when targeting an audience to buy an iPhone, the audience should consist of people who would buy iPhones but haven't already and have the means to make the purchase. Identifying which stage of the adoption process the target audience is in is important for choosing media strategies. In order to get the audience to the awareness phase, advertisements and news stories should be implemented to highlight the product or issue. In the interest phase, the target audience is seeking more information on a product, and that can be achieved through a brochure or an in-depth article online or in a magazine. Evaluation is the process by which the consumer takes the information he or she already knows, gets feedback from family and friends, and makes an informed opinion on the product or idea. Trial is an experimentation phase which requires sampling or viewing a demonstration. The final step is adoption, which signifies the integration of the product or idea into the individual's life. It's important to note that not everyone goes through every step and not everyone makes it to the end. You can think about this graphic with the meningitis campaign. Where were you in this process before this presentation? Were you aware of meningitis and how to prevent it? Have you had a vaccination? Most of you are probably too old now to get one, but if you have teenage siblings, perhaps you could share this information with them. There are 5 factors that affect the adoption process. The first, relative advantage, refers to an innovation being perceived as better than the idea it replaces. The second, compatibility, refers to the perception that the new idea is consistent with existing values, experiences, and needs of potential adopters. Complexity is how difficult the audience thinks it's going to be to understand and use the innovation. Trialability refers to the degree that the audience can experience the innovation before adoption. Finally, observability is the visibility of results or benefits of the innovation. Complexity has the potential to hinder the adoption process, while the others have the potential to aid in the adoption process. The adoption process can be described by Everett Rogers' innovation adoption curve. Early adopters are often opinion leaders who influence the remainder of the groups. The early majority adopts the product only after seeing its success in the other groups, and the late majority is skeptical, but tries to adopt the product or idea after being convinced. When trying to convince the mass of a new idea, messages are often targeted toward innovators and early adopters. In this presentation, we looked at various strategies used by public relations professionals to ensure the audience receives the message, pays attention to it, understands it, finds it credible, remembers it, and takes action. We also reviewed some communication models and theoretical approaches. Now that we understand the basics for crafting a great message, how do we deliver that message? In the presentation called the Integrated Public Relations Media Model, you will learn about some of the PR tactics you can use to deliver this message.